The boy's words cut through the December cold like a knife. Mom said Santa forgot us again this year. Marcus Chen stopped mid-stride, his $1,000 shoes frozen on the icy pavement. He'd been heading to his empty penthouse after another 16-hour day at the office, but something in the child's voice made him turn around. The bus stop was deserted except for a small boy, maybe 7 years old, sitting alone on the bench with a threadbare jacket pulled tight around his shoulders. Snow had started to fall, dusting his dark hair with white flakes that he didn't bother to brush away. "What are you doing out here by yourself?" Marcus asked, checking his watch. It was nearly midnight on Christmas Eve. "Waiting for Mom. She's working the late shift at the diner." The boy looked up with eyes too old for his face, eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. "She works every Christmas because they pay extra. We need it for my sister's medicine." Marcus should have walked away. He had a reputation for being cold, calculating, the billionaire who'd built his empire by never letting emotions cloud his judgment. The financial magazines called him the Ice King of Wall Street. His competitors feared him. His board members respected him. But nobody got close to him, and that was exactly how he designed his life for the past 3 decades. But something about this kid reminded him of someone he'd spent 30 years trying to forget. Marcus found himself sitting down on the cold bench, his expensive coat gathering snow. "What's your sister's name?" he asked, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. "Emma. She's 5. She has leukemia." The boy's voice cracked slightly, but he straightened his shoulders, trying to be brave. "Mom sold her wedding ring last month to pay for treatments. That's why Santa can't find us anymore. We moved to the cheaper apartment across town. We've moved 3 times this year. I told Emma that Santa just needs our new address, but..." The boy trailed off, and Marcus saw him blink rapidly, fighting tears. "That's not how Santa works," Marcus said softly, though he hadn't thought about Santa Claus in decades. "I know there's no Santa, mister. I'm not a baby." The boy wiped his nose with his sleeve, leaving a wet streak across the worn fabric. "But Emma still believes, and I can't tell her the truth. She asked Santa for just one thing this year, a ballerina music box like the one Mom had to pawn. It played Swan Lake. Mom would wind it up and Emma would dance around the living room, pretending to be a ballerina." His voice grew quieter. "She doesn't even know Mom sold it to buy her medicine. She thinks Mom packed it away for safekeeping." Marcus felt something twist in his chest, a sensation he trained himself not to feel. He'd built walls around his heart brick by brick, deal by deal, until he'd convinced himself he didn't need anyone. His penthouse overlooked the entire city, but he always celebrated Christmas alone with a glass of scotch and financial reports. That was safer. Numbers didn't betray you. Numbers didn't leave. "How old are you, son?" Marcus asked. 7.5. Almost 8. The boy said it with the pride of someone clinging to every milestone. "I'm in 2nd grade. I got all A's on my report card, but Mom cried when she saw it. I thought she'd be happy, but she said she was crying because she was proud. Adults cry weird sometimes." "What's your name?" "David. David Morrison." Morrison. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he kept his face neutral. It was a common enough surname. It couldn't be. "And your father?" Marcus asked carefully, his heart beginning to pound. David's face fell. "He died 3 years ago. Car accident. He was coming home from a construction job in the rain." The boy's voice became very small. "Mom said he was rushing because he wanted to make it home for my birthday. He never made it." The number 47 bus rumbled into view, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. But Marcus didn't move. Instead, he pulled out his phone, his mind racing through calculations that had nothing to do with profit margins. "David, does your mother keep any photographs of your father?" "Yeah, there's one on the wall. He's wearing his army uniform from before I was born. Mom says he was the bravest man she ever knew." Pride filled the boy's voice. He used to tell me stories about when he was young, before he met Mom. He had a friend once, a best friend. They were going to change the world together, he said. But something happened and they stopped talking. Dad never told me what, but sometimes he'd look sad and say he missed his friend. Marcus couldn't breathe. The air felt too thin, the snow too heavy. His hands trembled as he dialed his assistant's number. "Richard, I need you to open the warehouse." "Yes, tonight. I don't care if it's Christmas Eve. And call Dr. Pemberton at Mercy Hospital. Tell her I'm invoking the foundation clause. Full pediatric oncology team. Best equipment. Everything. Patient name is Emma Morrison. He paused, his throat tight. And Richard, find me a ballerina music box. Antique, plays Swan Lake. I don't care what it costs or where you have to look. I need it by morning. The boy stared at him, confused and slightly frightened. Mister, what are you? What's your address, son? Marcus asked, standing up and offering his hand to the boy. David rattled off an address in a neighborhood Marcus usually only saw from highway overpasses, the kind of place his board members warned him away from. But 20 minutes later, Marcus's black SUV pulled up to a crumbling apartment building with broken front steps and flickering hallway lights. David led him up 3 flights of stairs, the stairwell smelling of old cooking and dampness. The boy stopped at apartment 3C, suddenly hesitant. Mom's gonna be scared if a stranger shows up, David said. She's protective since Dad died. Tell her I'm a friend of your father's, Marcus said. Tell her I'm here to keep a promise. David knocked softly, and the door opened to reveal a tiny woman in a grease-stained diner uniform, her face etched with exhaustion. Fear flashed across her features at seeing a stranger with her son, but before she could speak, Marcus saw past her into the apartment. Behind the woman, a little girl with a bald head and sunken eyes peeked out from behind a threadbare couch. The apartment was tiny, barely larger than Marcus's walk-in closet. No tree. No decorations. Just a space heater, some donated furniture, and a small table with mac and cheese boxes stacked in the corner. But it was the photograph on the wall that made Marcus's blood run cold and his heart break open after 30 years of careful numbness. A younger version of the mother, smiling radiantly, holding a baby. Next to her stood a man in military uniform, his arm around her shoulders, his face filled with joy and hope. He knew that face. He'd know it anywhere. James Morrison, Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the rattling of the old radiator. You're James Morrison's wife. The woman's eyes widened with recognition and something else, a flicker of understanding that cut through her exhaustion. You knew my husband. Marcus couldn't breathe. The walls of the tiny apartment seemed to close in around him as memories flooded back with crushing force. James Morrison had been his best friend, his business partner in those early struggling years when they'd shared a studio apartment and lived on ramen noodles and dreams. They'd made a pact over cheap beer on a rooftop one summer night. If either of them made it big, they'd take care of the other's family. They'd sealed it with a handshake and laughter, never imagining they'd actually need to keep that promise. Then came the argument. The falling out over Marcus's ruthless business tactics, the way he'd started cutting corners and pushing people aside to climb faster. James had confronted him in their shared office, his voice filled with disappointment rather than anger. You're becoming someone I don't recognize, James had said. Money's changing you, Marcus. When did we stop being about building something good and start being about just building something big? Marcus had told him to leave if he didn't like it. And James had walked away from the company, from the partnership, from the friendship. He'd walked away from millions of dollars because he wouldn't compromise his principles. That had been 15 years ago. Marcus had gotten the letter 3 years ago, forwarded through 6 different addresses before it found him. James had died in a car accident, leaving behind a wife and 2 kids. By the time Marcus had tracked down the funeral details, it was over. He'd told himself they were fine, that James must have left them provided for. He'd been too much of a coward to check, too afraid of what he might find, too ashamed of what he'd become. He talked about you, Sarah Morrison said quietly, her voice neither warm nor cold, just tired. So very tired. Even after everything, he talked about you. Said you weren't always the man the newspapers described. Said you used to stay up all night helping him study for exams. Said you once gave your last $20 to a homeless veteran because James mentioned it was the right thing to do. Marcus felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling. Mrs. Morrison, his voice failed him. How do you apologize for 3 years of willful blindness? For letting pride and shame keep you from honoring a promise to a dead friend? For choosing comfort over courage? Emma, sweetie, go back to bed, Sarah said gently, though her eyes never left Marcus's face. The little girl disappeared behind the couch, but Marcus could see her watching with wide, hopeful eyes that reflected the colored lights from a neighbor's apartment across the airshaft. David stood silent, piecing things together with a child's frightening intuition, his young mind connecting the dots between his father's lost friend and this wealthy stranger who'd stopped at a bus stop on Christmas Eve. Marcus pulled out his phone again, his hand shaking for the first time in decades. His voice was stronger now, filled with purpose he hadn't felt in years. Dr. Pemberton, I need a full treatment plan for a pediatric leukemia patient. Emma Morrison, 5 years old. Send your best team to Mercy Hospital immediately. Patient will be admitted tonight for evaluation. Cost is irrelevant. He paused, his throat tight with emotion. And activate the James Morrison Memorial Fund. Yes, it exists as of right now. Full medical coverage and family support. Indefinite duration. Pull the original partnership agreement from 2010. There's a clause on page 47. Execute it immediately. Sarah's legs gave out. David caught her arm with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before. This 7-year-old boy who'd become the man of the house far too young, who'd learned to be strong when his world kept crumbling. Why? Sarah whispered, sliding into the worn chair by the space heater. Why now? We've been struggling for 3 years. 3 years of choosing between medicine and rent, between Emma's treatments and David's school supplies. Why tonight? Because I made a promise 30 years ago, and I'm 3 years late keeping it. Marcus's voice was rough with emotion he'd thought long dead, buried under quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. Because your husband was the only person who ever told me the truth about who I was becoming, and I was too proud to listen. Because I convinced myself that success meant leaving everything behind, including the people who made me human. He looked at David, then at little Emma peeking around the couch again. Because Santa didn't forget you, I did. He knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with the children. Emma crept closer, drawn by something gentle in his voice. Your father and I built something together once. We started with nothing but ideas and determination. He walked away because I'd lost sight of what mattered. I started measuring worth in dollars instead of people. But he left something behind, something I'd forgotten about. Marcus pulled an envelope from his coat. A clause in our original partnership agreement that I never removed. It stated that if anything happened to either of us, the surviving partner would ensure the other's family was cared for. I let lawyers bury it in paperwork. I let myself forget because remembering was too painful. Marcus stood, placing the envelope on the small table. Inside was a check and a set of keys. There's an apartment near Mercy Hospital. 3 bedrooms, safe neighborhood, paid for. Dr. Pemberton is the best pediatric oncologist in the state. Emma starts treatment tomorrow with a team I trust completely. Your medical bills are gone. David's college fund is established, and there's enough for whatever Emma needs, whatever you all need. He paused, his voice breaking. It's not enough. It will never be enough to make up for 3 years of abandonment. But it's a start toward honoring who James was and what he meant to me. Sarah's tears fell silently, tracking through the flour dust still on her cheeks from the diner. James would have forgiven you. He had a heart too big for grudges. No, Marcus said honestly, his eyes glistening. James would be furious it took me this long. He'd probably punch me and then hug me. But maybe, if I do this right, if I help Emma get well, if I make sure David gets every opportunity, if I ensure you never have to choose between your children's needs again, maybe I can become someone he wouldn't be ashamed to call friend again. Emma tugged on his coat with small, fragile fingers. Are you really Santa? Marcus looked down at this little girl who still believed in magic despite everything, despite losing her hair, despite the pain of treatments, despite living in poverty. No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who forgot what Christmas was supposed to mean. But your daddy, he never forgot. He lived every day believing in kindness and goodness. He's the real Santa. He's just been working through me tonight, reminding me who I used to be. A knock on the door made them all turn. Marcus's assistant Richard appeared, impossibly efficient even at 1 a.m, carrying carefully wrapped packages. A ballerina music box that had taken 3 phone calls and a small fortune to locate from a collector in Boston. New winter coats sized perfectly for 2 children. Groceries. A small artificial tree with lights. And presents for Christmas morning. Not expensive showpieces, but thoughtful gifts chosen with care. The kind James would have chosen.